And now all the topics are open for discussion. I can invite all the panelists to as well participate fully in the discussion, and they can also raise questions to the speakers as well. So the first question is from the audience, that is Dr. Abhijit to Dr. Patil. What should be the pointer direction while doing the epicardial mitral valve assessment?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Yeah, we can.
I think the pointer direction, when you place it for the epicardial listing, the pointer has to be directed towards the left shoulder. Probably then you'll get the accurate assessment for the epicardial viewing.
I think Abhijit, it is clear for you. And again, Dr. Patil, the second question is from Dr. Anuja. It's also to you. What is the clinical significance of the minor axis and the major axis for the cardiac anesthesiologist point of view?
No, the major axis, major axis is actually it involves the intercommissural distance. What is most important, because when the surgeon usually places along the commissures, the anterolateral commissure and the posterior commissure, it is more important. And the minor axis is actually between the A2 and the P2 segments, which is actually seen in the long axis of this thing. But the most important for us is the mitral commissural view, because it cuts across both the commissures. That's why it is very important for us, because it involves both the commissures, the anterolateral and the posterior commissure. And the valve placement is actually along the commissures only. And actually, if you calculate the intercommissural distance, you can measure the size of the valve, in fact.
Thank you, Dr. Patil. And we can take one question from one of our panelists, that is Dr. Jigisa, to Dr. Kosi. How you will differentiate between thrombus and pannus in 2D and 3D prosthetic valve?
See, thrombus can occur immediately after a prosthetic valve, anytime. Whereas a pannus, it usually takes a long time. So you have to, first of all, you have to see the history. Pannus is say that a few years, 5 years. The second thing is pannus is stationary, and thrombus can be stationary or mobile. Thrombus can be big, pannus is not that big. A thrombus is soft in echo density, pannus is more echo dense. And these are the basic features. And if you look at any of the literature, I think they have given more criteria. But basically, these are the things. Sometimes you can, very difficult to differentiate between pannus and thrombus, but keep the history also. Then suppose the patient is not missed the anticoagulants, that is more in favor of a thrombus than pannus.
I request all the panelists to switch on their audio and video as well, so that they can give their opinion and suggestions and answers to the questions with the video.
I have a question for Dr. Mukherjee. Is he there?
Can you switch on your video, please?
Yeah, please.
My video is on.
Yes, please tell me.
Can you see me, sir?
Yes, I can hear you pretty well.
All right. I have a question for Dr. Mukherjee.
Yeah.
Dr. Mukherjee, I'm a surgeon. It was a lovely talk. And but my question to you and for all of us is that, as a surgeon, when I'm dealing with MR, I am interested in the ejection fraction. And my cardiologist tells me, fantastic, this is an ejection fraction of 60%, 70%, please go on. After surgery, I commonly find that you may have an LV, ejection fraction post a repair or a mitral valve replacement, about 30%, and the LV is struggling to get off. Now, for a common person, I would love you to elucidate or illustrate, whichever way, as to how can we ascertain or assess LV function, viability, and predict post-operative parameters which will alert us to dangers ahead. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. This is a very important question which every anesthetist needs to understand. And from a surgical point of view, always the surgeon have a concern why, first of all, my preoperative ejection fraction was good, and after a mitral valve, it has gone down, either replace or repair. That may be also a, but my understanding is if you do it in the same hemodynamic conditions, whether you do the, any kind of maneuver like increasing the systemic vascular resistance, or you give some inotropes, the question is the preoperative, if you can simulate the preoperative hemodynamics, similar to what is postoperative hemodynamics, then you have like a ideal one-to-one situation to assess your valve repair. But most of the times you will see either you get underfilled ventricles, or the pressures, the vasopressors are on, or your inotropic supports are on. So there is a change in the hemodynamics, which you'll obviously see postoperative much different from what you had preoperative. But the thing is that, first of all, common things first, try to, you need to idealize your basic all hemodynamic parameters. Then you have to think, why is the ventricle not functioning like preoperative after your repair? Because the time, if you see, there is what Professor Enda has very nicely elucidated is you get airing. De-airing is the first thing which, the surgeon is very eager to come out of the pump, and there is some air and you need to de-air, and then it typically goes into the RCA. RCA get blocks and you get into the right ventricle failure. So that is one thing you have to be in, very friendly basis with your surgeon. And, the surgeons lacks, typical surgeon lacks the patience. So, but if you are doing it for this on a day-to-day basis, I hope an understand each other. So if you have got this in hand, and then the uncommon things, like suturing of iatrogenic suturing of the circumflex, that should be your next way to look into the thing. But in spite of all this, if you're having a failing ventricle, there can be many reasons. But, first, what I would see is to basically get the hemodynamics in place, assess it, try to assess it pre and post-op, and then assess the repair, rather than, immediately your clamp is off and you put some color and try to see whether there is a regurg or not. And typically, once the clamps are off, you're in a mean say 60 or 70, and then when you have a systolic high, peak pressure of 121, or even to the extent of 160, then you have a totally different assessment of the mitral regurgitation intraoperative after the clamp is off, and then postoperatively. So please don't comment to a surgeon whether you have done an excellent repair or a bad repair unless you have got the proper hemodynamics in place. So take your time, maybe warm the surgeon, warm the patient, make the hemodynamics okay, and in an ideal situation, and then make your comments.
Dr. Mukherjee,
yeah,
you have fantastic machines. The technology is so advanced.
Right.
Are there modalities or things that you can do or measure preoperatively? Say things like, the thickness of the LV, or are there some predictive factors which will tell me as a surgeon, or you will tell me as an anesthetist or an echocardiographer that this guy is going to give me problems? I'll have my ECMO machine ready.
Yeah. So if you see, the SAM, which was predicted nicely with Dr. Enda's slide, you can probably, can you put up that slide of SAM?
I'm getting back to him.
Yeah. So if you have something like that, where you have a AML, PML ratio, CSAP distance, you can be almost sure you need an experienced surgeon to deal with this. And you can almost predict that, if there is something called a crossover SAM, where the AML, PML ratio is very, elongated PML, then you can almost predict that there is going to be a long day, because this really needs expertise on the operating table who can do that. But if you have a very thick ventricle, and then sometimes it can be that you have a CSAP distance which is really less than 1.8 or 9, and then you have, like I said, you cannot come out of the pump with a kissing papillaries. You have to really fill up the ventricle. You have to increase the systemic vascular resistance, and then ideally. But to prepare an ECMO preoperatively for any kind of mitral valve repair, I wouldn't suggest, unless you are going in for papillary muscle rupture with an ejection fraction of less than 20. Then you are almost predestined to come out with an elective ECMO.
Yeah. Can I say
Can I
something
first
here?
ask one comment on this?
Yes, sir.
Can I comment on this?
Yes,
The
sir.
basic problem MR is that the ejection fraction preoperatively is overestimated.
Yeah,
So
I was just coming on that.
yeah, it is overestimated. So the ejection fraction, it is looking at the end systolic and end-diastolic volume, and there is a pop-up mechanism in MR where some of the blood is going to the left atrium when the left ventricle is contracting. So the end systolic volume may be actually low, and you read a high ejection fraction. But once the pop-up mechanism is shut, the left ventricular function is going to deteriorate. That's what is the common problem. So if the LV ejection fraction is 50 in MR, you can certainly say that he's going to do not as well as if the LVEF was 60 to begin with. So what is 50 considered as normal or acceptable is not true in MR situation. That is my take on
Would
this
you go by
question.
some thickness of some LV wall thickness?
I just wanted to pass some comment on this.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
First of all, the ejection fraction in the setting of mitral regurgitation is not true ejection fraction.
Absolutely.
It is overestimated. The ejection fraction less than 60 in presence of MR is considered LV dysfunction.
Right.
That's the first point. Whatever we have seen the ejection fraction pre-op is not true ejection fraction, which is actually less. Second point is when we consider the ejection fraction less than 60 in a patient, even asymptomatic severe MR is subjected for intervention. 2, end systolic dimension. If you have an ejection fraction which looks above 60, but your end systolic dimension is more than 45 or 50s, you are going to have a bad outcome in this patient. 2, the patients who have severe pulmonary arterial hypertension, after your repair or replacement, there is no decrease in the PA pressure. These patients are going to have bad outcome. Then second, the etiology of the MR, what you are dealing. If it is a primary MR, your recovery of the LV function is good. If it is a secondary MR, then you have to consider multiple factors in the secondary MR. So therefore, the criteria used to intervene in severe MR in secondary etiology is very, very tight than primary MR. You have to do a revascularization, severe MR, you intervene. If you are not doing revascularization, severe MR is medical treatment. If there is a patient refractory to medical treatment, you repair. And there comes a last 2 indication for Alfieri or MitraClip in that particular place. So the secondary MR, there is a very stringent criteria to repair from the beginning. So if you have not done or looked into this criteria, you land in LV function, which is bad later. So it becomes our primary duty to intimate the patients what looks 55 before surgery actually is a factual ejection fraction which can be less. Then look at the eccentric hypertrophy or the thickness of the ventricular myocardium. Obviously, if you have an MRI, it shows more fibrosis of the myocardium. These patients are going to recover less. So these are the practical aspects why we start with the high ejection fraction, land with the low ejection fraction after surgery.
I want to raise one issue there. See, this I have observed. If the cardiologist or cardiokinesis measure ejection fraction of 50, you send to the radiologist with CMR, they record 40. And as the ejection fraction comes from, the disparity between CMR and the echo is wide. Yes. Above normal, it is more close, but when we record 50, the radiologist says it is only 40. 60,
may I just interrupt?
They 55. So this I have observed. This is reported.
There is one question from the audience pertaining to this by Dr. Sridhar Doshi. He says, what is the role of strain before and after MV repair in MR? Because EF overestimates LV function in MR. What is your expert opinion on this?
Yes, you can use the GLS. If it is the GLS in a patient with the MR, especially if it is secondary MR, and the GLS can be influenced because of the coronary artery disease. And If it is a primary MR, yes, it sounds good. If the GLS is more than -20, this heart is going to recover. So, but in a secondary MR, the GLS may not sound good. And about the MRI, why we get this picture of ejection fraction lower in comparison to echo? The MR estimates the ejection fraction based on the stroke volume, which is measured in the ascending aorta within 10 millimeter beyond the aortic valve. That is called CMR phase contrast stroke volume estimation. Another is called CMR volumetric assessment. That is end diastolic volume minus end systolic volume. But what the MRI takes, it is a short axis including the papillary muscle, and the endocardium delineation is very good. So if you are using a report or giving a report of volumetric assessment of CMR, you will get a higher ejection fraction.
Okay.
If you are using a CMR of phase contrast, which will be more accurate ejection fraction. But whatever it is, if the echo endostolic dimension measurement inter or intra-observer variability is less, but end systolic diameter measurement inter and intra-observer variability is high. So the ejection fraction becomes a little more.
Okay.
So if you do the tracing or the Simpson, taking care of the end systolic dimension, then you will get a proper ejection fraction.
Okay, sir. Thank you. Thanks a lot. There is a question from Dr. Abhijit Chittore. He asks, have the guidelines for MS quantification changed? He says that the is it 12 millimeters of mercury mean gradient to be called as severe? Can Dr. Ghosh take this question?
Yes, sir. As far as I know, it is more than 10 is severe. Hello, am I audible?
Yeah, that is what every one of us knows. But he asked that have the guidelines changed?
Yeah.
He's saying that.
Sir, I do not know.
I think 10 only. I think Ender showed the slide. It is 10. Course roll.
Yes. Yeah. So this is the question that he's asking. That's why I'm just telling. That's why I just want.
We will go by what Dr. Ender says. He is our echo guru.
Yeah.
The answer is clear. The guidelines haven't changed.
Okay,
so severe mitral stenosis is a mean gradient above 10. 5 to 10 is moderate, and below 5 it's mild. That's it.
Yeah. So Dr. Ender, there is one question for you from Dr. Muthukumar. He says, can you please elaborate on the criteria for repair of ischemic MR with perioperative TE?
So that is a very difficult question, and I think in the last years it has changed a little bit because I mentioned the tenting height and the tenting area, and I think that is really a very good criteria. And if you look at the development of the surgeons, so secondary MR repair is very difficult because we know that the success rate is very low. So more than 50% of the patients with secondary MR undergoing mitral valve repair will end up with severe mitral regurgitation after 2 years. If the tenting height, which is the height from the mitral annular plane to the coaptation, is more than 1.2 centimeters. So I would say tenting height is a very simple parameter to measure and to predict long-term or feasibility of repair. There was another question regarding the interpapillary muscle distance. So looking at secondary MR, it is not a problem of the leaflets itself. It's a problem of the left ventricle, which is not addressed by simply putting an annuloplasty ring in. So, and that means if the tenting of the leaflets due to the left ventricular dilatation is too severe, then that tenting will not stop and it will become more and more after annuloplasty. And that will end up with residual or new onset of MR after at least 1 or 2 years. So that is why the newer studies, which compared mitral valve repair and mitral valve replacement with sparing the tertiary chordae, which is now done. In former times, at least in Europe, the mitral leaflet in mitral valve replacement were really resected completely. Now, if you do a mitral valve replacement in secondary MR, the surgeon tried to leave a lot of mitral valve tissue in the, not to resect that. So that means that you spare and you respect the tertiary cords, which will end up with a better left ventricular function as it was in studies 10 years ago. So to make it short, I would say tenting height of more than 1.2 centimeters, at least in our center, we would go for mitral valve replacement instead of repair, because long-term results are much better than.
Dr. Ender.
Yes.
Lovely talk. Again, coming to you on dimensions. The length of your anterior leaflets.
Yes.
You have a lot of experience with degeneratives and maybe ischemics. So what would you comment on the length of anterior leaflet and the feasibility of a mitral repair?
So we routinely measure the length of the anterior mitral leaflet to predict the correct size of the annuloplasty ring. And we did a study which we published in the European Journal of Cardiovascular Imaging, where we compared the 2D measurement of the anterior mitral leaflet and the 3D measurements, including the intercommissural distance. That is what you do if you put a sizer in.
Yeah.
So you look at the anterior mitral leaflet length and you look at the intercommissural distance. And sorry for that. And we found a good correlation, so which means 0.7 just for the anterior mitral leaflet length. So if you have a huge mitral valve, and you know that the largest ring available is 40 millimeters. So if you have a huge mitral valve, you can end up with SEM if your posterior mitral leaflet length is too much, and if you don't pull your posterior mitral leaflet far down. So if you have a little bit more mobility of the posterior mitral leaflet and you have a too small annuloplasty ring because the valve is too large, then you end up with SEM. Then we would go, we would try for the first run to use the Corday and to put in the largest annuloplasty ring. But then if we end up with SEM and having a 40 millimeter annuloplasty ring in, you can do a Alfieri stitch between A2, P2 additionally, and then you will prevent the SEM. So the anterior mitral leaflet length is not so much for preventing SEM, but to predict annuloplasty ring size.
Yeah. So to take this discussion about mitral valve repair forward, there is a question from Dr. Muthukumar Rajagopalan. He asked that whether the tenting height, area, and volume are to be calculated in 3D only, or can it be done by 2D also?
It can also be done by 3D, but at least I don't know a publication which shows much more benefit of the 3D. So I love 3D, okay, but the tenting height is can easily be measured with the long axis. Of course, you have the advantage of 3D is that you can really calculate also the tenting height of the A3P3 segment, which is much more involved in some of the secondary mitral valve repair. But to my knowledge, it's not really clinical benefit of that, of 3D over 2D.
Okay.
Dr. Ender, there is another question from the audience from Dr. Arupantham. That is, how much you rely on the mitral valve's navigation software for mitral valve repair? They have seen that there is some variability in the assessment with that software.
Yeah, to be honest, we do some research, but up to now, that is my opinion, none of the software, neither TomTec, neither the Philips software for automatic mitral valve navigation, without really thorough assessment and adjustment by the echocardiographer, present up to now valid data. It's becoming more and more simple compared to 8 years ago. So that is nice. And especially the newest version of the mitral valve navigation, you just need 2 or 3 clicks. But it depends on the image quality. And I would really not rely just on that automatic measurement. I will really go into that measurement and into the definition of the leaflets in both the Philips and the TomTec software, just to be sure that the measurements are really correct. Because if it comes to let's say annuloplasty ring size, you know that the difference from one size to the other is just 2 millimeters. And I think maybe Dr. Mukherjee can point on that, because he is much more involved in the TomTec sessions. For me, up to now, just automatic use of that software will not allow correct measurements. What do you think, Chiro?
I completely agree with you, because whatever the automated system, it takes all the the strain parameters into into the view, and any image which is not rightly captured will give all false measurements. So quality of the image is probably the first criteria which you have to have, and then the automation needs to be manually corrected, because the biggest problem is, I think, is the ventricle, whether they're measuring the exact points needs to be recorrected, and that is my biggest problem with automatic software, because whatever you do, some element needs to be manually still corrected.
There is one question from Dr. Sanjeevani Inamdar. She asked that how much do you give importance for mitral annular calcification whenever you are considering any sort of mitral valve intervention? Because that has not been enlightened in any of the lectures so far.
Doctor,
the question is for me or for?
Yeah, anyone.
Dr. Ghosh Dr. Ghosh can answer, I think, this.
Generally, mitral annular calcification is a negative predictor for repair, and the surgeons are also nervous for replacement whenever there is a calcification. And some surgeons, like one of our surgeons, do some decalcifying procedure. He just peels off and try to repair, but it's a risky procedure. So mitral annular calcification, as far as my institute is concerned, it's a risky procedure for surgeon.
Yeah, so then how do we sort of assess whether this patient can go ahead with mitral valve intervention or no? Are there any sort of parameters for that?
We have to report that mitral annular calcification. It is an important point of echo report.
Yeah, so are there any grades for that? Anyone?
Well, there are no grades for that.
Yeah.
But as a surgeon, then my cardiologist or anesthetist will tell me about mitral valve annular calcification, I am scared. I will go in with my repertoire. And if I have too much of calcification and I cannot decalcify it, in that situation, an Alfieri is a great bailout procedure for a repair. Or stitches, there are colleagues of mine who have also advocated a chimney procedure, whereas the mitral valve replacement, the valve is placed in a graft and the graft is sutured onto the LA wall outside the calcification. Dr. Muralidhar?
Yes, I know this.
There's a question to Dr. Patil. When we assess the coronary flows in the circumflex artery, Dr. Anuja Kulkarni needs to know what is the inquest limit, how much it should be adjusted.
Actually, because coronary flow is a quite low flow, you need to come down to around 30 or 25, something like that, to get this thing, coronary flow. It has to be a low Nyquist limit.
20 to 30 is fine.
Yeah.
And one can record the pulsar Doppler also, isn't it?
Pardon me?
On the coronary flow, we can record pulsar Doppler also.
Of course, yeah. Because you can have this thing, both systolic and diastolic flow, wherein the diastolic will be more prominent.
Pulsar Doppler also is possible.
But Thomas, the coronary flows normally is perpendicular to the direction of Doppler, so that might not give a proper readings.
No, not on the circumflex. Actually, if at all, if you want to do it, go to the short axis of the aortic valve then
Yeah.
withdraw the probe a little bit and then go either you will see the circumflex or the LAD, you can do it.
LED you
Not
can do
only-
it, but the circumflex is really difficult.
Circumflex is difficult, but in the short axis of the aortic valve, you can do it.
Yes.
Because the flow there, it will go up, then you can have a beam alignment in the short axis of the aortic valve. Only important thing there is you need to withdraw the probe so that the aortic leaflets disappear, and then you can see a good left main and branching out into the circumflex above and the LAD down below. There you can do a pulse wave Doppler.
Can I make a comment on about how do we go? Because all these measurements and calculations, all the experts have explained nicely. But inside the operation theater, when we are coming off the bypass, and we have got very limited time to do all these calculations, and we have to manage the patients as well. For as an anesthesiologist, what I do, I give most importance to the pulmonary venous flow. Normally, before going for the operation of mitral valve, if you see pulmonary venous flow, the S wave is normally smaller uptrended, and the D wave is taller, and that is the sign that the left atrial pressures are high. And it is very easy. It doesn't take more than few seconds to measure the left atrial pressure through the pulmonary venous flow. But once the operation is done, whether repair or replacement, and the LA pressure goes down, you will find a drastic change in the pulmonary venous flow. The S wave will go higher than the D wave. So moment, if you see the S wave, which was shorter than the D before surgery, has become taller than D after surgery, it means your repair is very successful. That is very quick method of assessment of your success of repair of mitral valve. That's what I practice in all my patients.
Okay, Dr. Chirojit, there are 3 questions from you. Number 1 is that as a cardiac anesthesiologist, we would like to know whether you go for elective fibrillation of heart during deployment of the mitral valve. 1. Second is, have you done these procedures on patients who are awake like for TAVR? And third, do you feel that the transcatheter mitral valve replacement will replace surgical MVR like the TAVR? These are 3 questions related to your topic. So can you please take them one by one?
Yes. So let's go by the last one. So as of today, on 24th of August 2020, you cannot say that surgical mitral valve replacement or repair will be replaced by transcatheter mitral valve. What is going to happen in 2025? I am not an astrologer, I cannot predict. But as far as the trends are going, there are more incidences of transcatheter repairs compared to before. And as you have seen with TAVR, even in the low risk patients, they are being deployed. So I won't be surprised if there is a paradigm shift in the future. But as of today, it's very much in the stage of infancy as far as transcatheter mitral valve replacement is concerned. So definitely it's a no, it cannot replace as of now. Second question is, can TAVRs be done on an awake patient? Is that correct?
Can transcatheter mitral valve replacements be done on awake patients?
Yes. If you see our publication from Leipzig, we have done on a very short patient group, and but it is doable, and it is very well doable if you have a cardiologist who is very much used to fluoroscopy. But it can be risky because the patient may land up with a pressure crash because it's a high grade aortic stenosis. And I would say it is more for experimental and research purpose, and patient really, the only positive benefit is they come out of the OR without any pain. So they really don't have, but there are supporting measures you need to do like CPAP intraoperatively to get away the negative intrapleural pressure. So moment they open the transapical is going to be a gush of air. So you have to negate that with using a CPAP machine and put them on positive pressure ventilation. So that is something this was a idea, or rather between Professor Enda and myself, it was a brainchild. We thought if they can be done in GA, why not on the epidural? So we did it in a couple of patients. The results were good, but due to the logistics, we didn't proceed it further, but definitely it's doable. And the patient outcome and the patient pain management is much better than a GA, that much I can tell you. And what was the first question? Sorry.
Do you electively fibrillate the heart during inflation and deployment of the valve?
So during TAVR or transcatheter?
No, during transcatheter mitral valve replacement.
No, we don't do, because we don't want the valve to be, you can reduce the ejection fraction if you're doing fibrillation. We used to do initially, unless it's a very heavily calcified native calcification, we really don't do, because the chances of migration is not very high, because you're putting it like most of the valves use more or less like an umbrella technique, and it forms like a band around the mitral annulus. So I don't think it's at this present time we really benefit from in using ventricular fibrillation.
So just one question has popped up from Dr. Navneet Mehta. He asks whether transcatheter mitral valve replacement is another option for severe mitral valve calcification.
In native calcification, the results are not good. Probably you can say the device migration is very high. And with the 3 cases, what I have experienced, 2 have migrated and 1 landed up with annulus rupture. So at this point of time, it's not being done in our institute. And I feel we are still in the stage of infancy, and with the newer valves coming, there may be a total change of scenario. But as of now, if you're using the Sapiens or other older valves, I don't think it has any place on native annular calcification.
Okay, thanks a lot. There's one question.
Next question is from Dr. Suvendu, and for Dr. Kosi, how to tell the position of the paravalvular leak in 2D echo? There is another question to Dr. Kosi as well from Dr. Abhijit. What are the gain setting to know the paraprosthetic leak?
What is a gain setting or a Nyquist limit? For the paravalvular leak, you need to assess the regurgitant jet. And as I explained on one of the slides, the Nyquist limits is kept from 50 to 60. That is recommended as per the guideline, and that has come in European Journal of Guidelines published in 2016. They recommend 50 to 60 Nyquist limit. Is that what you want? Is it gain setting or Nyquist limit? Nyquist limit I already mentioned. Then what is the other question?
How to tell the position of the paravalvular leak in 2D echo?
Oh, 2D echo is a tedious process. You need to record 4-chamber, 2-chamber, and long axis view, and then assess which are the part which are having a rocking motion. But we have switched over to 3D. It's so easy, and we very often make mistakes with the 2D assessment. 3D is more comfortable, and we show the picture to the surgeon, 3D picture. They are happy with that. But definitely that Foster technique is there. Like the mitral valve can be interpreted as a face of clock with the 12 o'clock position aligning to the aorta, and opposite that 6 o'clock position, 10 o'clock position, the LA appendage. And in fact, we have published that the last but one slide I've showed is the European Journal of Surgery. It is published how we assess that.
Before we take the next question, any comment or any question from the panelist?
I just wanted to pass a comment on this paravalvular leak.
Yes, sir,
First
please.
of all, the idea when you get in a long axis view of any leak, as a mitral or aortic, you may not get the number of leaks. So the best view will be a short axis view. And any mitral valve or aortic valve short axis view, you take as per the quadrant which area it is leaking. It may look in long axis view 1, you may land in finding 2. Second point is, if somebody is doing a device closure of a paravalvular leak, 3D TE is mandatory. If you get a 3D TE in a short axis view, you may find multiple leaks because they are not circular or oval. They are almost eccentric or elliptical in nature. So about the gain setting, I don't think it is different from that a color Doppler MR setting. It has to be appropriate gain setting. And about the multiplicity and device closure, 3D is compulsory. And
Okay.
short axis, my opinion, is better than the long axis view.
Okay, sir, thank you.
I
There
want
are
a,
two-
I want a opinion
I'm
from
Dr.
Dr. Thomas.
Raghunathan here.
Yeah.
I'm a
Please
panelist. I'm a
Yes,
cardiac
sir.
surgeon at Narayana Hrudayalaya, Bangalore.
Yes, sir.
I was
Please
going
go
through
ahead.
the chat. There was a question from one of the audience regarding caudal preservation for a patient undergoing mitral valve replacement.
Right. That was from
I'd like
Dr.
to make a
Inamdar.
comment on that. Earlier days, maybe 2-3 decades ago, all surgeons were excising the entire valve, doing it for mitral stenosis. But over a period of time, we have come to understand that caudal preservation helps in preserving LV function after surgery. Now, as a surgeon, and I'm sure the other surgeons on the panel will agree that if we can preserve maximum caudal, then it will help in post-op recovery of the patient. Posterior mitral leaflet preservation is usually done in all patients. If you can preserve the AML also, you have various techniques called the Consari A and B. There are various other techniques also. But the commonly used one is the Consari technique, where you can preserve the AML. You detach the AML from the anterior annulus, split it in the middle, trim the edges, and fix it towards the commissures or towards the PML, and then implant your valve. That way, you have total caudal preservation or almost total caudal preservation. You can preserve the LV function and have good short-term and long-term benefits. This was a question raised by one of the audience, so I thought I'll just clarify on that.
Thanks a lot.
I have one comment on that. When there is a caudal preservation, it's better that the anesthesiologist know about it. Because when there is a caudal preservation, suppose the caudal preservation of the posterior leaflet, some amount of sewing room motion will be there. That cannot be interpreted as a dehiscence. So is that correct, Dr. Ravindra Shetty, that some amount of rocking motion occurs once the caudal preservation is done? That is
I have not experienced this, and our cardiac anesthetists after TE also have not expressed this. And both intra-op and post-op echoes also, we have not seen this. And we have got excellent results, and we have got very good short-term and long-term results with preservation of most of the chordae or all chordae. But this rocking motion part of it, I'm not too sure. We can ask Dr. Muralidhar or Dr. Mala, who are from our institution, whether they can elaborate on that.
This has been reported in the 2009 JIS article by Sophie. That is a landmark article. So they have reported it, 2009. After that,
can you explain once again, sir, what exactly happens?
Posterior caudal leaflet preservation. Some of the motion will be there for the sewing room, the replaced valve. So that is not because the dehiscence. This is allowed by the preservation.
Okay, because of the tissue there, there's allowing some movement.
Some movement. So that's not.
I see. Okay.
Now there is one similar question by two of the delegates, that how to assess mitral valve after Alfieri stitch. Dr. Ender, it's for you.
I have to put on my mic. So the best thing to do is with 3D planimetry, and to planimetry really all the orifice and then add the orifice area together. That is for the mitral valve area to exclude mitral stenosis. For mitral regurgitation, you should use the PISA measurement and the vena contracta area, and you should add each regurgitation jet. So measure the PISA and the vena contracta of each jet and add it together so that you end up with one vena contracta or PISA. But that is really very, very difficult. The other thing, which is, I think, not yet implanted in the guidelines, but which is recommended, is for the mitral regurgitation, is the 3D vena contracta area, which you can also measure with multiplanar reformatting. And I rely very much on that, because then you don't have any calculation, you just measure it. And that is a good thing. And I see Dr. Malhara agreed to that. Yes. So maybe you can also comment on that.
I just wanted to ask Dr. Ander, how much you take the collective area of the medial orifice and the lateral orifice together to say it is a successful Alfieri?
Sorry, can you repeat the question again?
The collective area of the medial orifice and the lateral orifice, how much
Yes.
you declare to be a good repair, or how much you accept the area, mitral valve area, combined together.
How low you mean? So
Yes.
to exclude the mitral stenosis, I feel comfortable if we have a combined area of more than 2 centimeters square.
Ideally,
So I think 1.5 is too low.
yes.
I think because there are still some restrictions with the 3D and some maybe some overestimations. So more than 2, I feel fine.
Absolutely, yes. Anything beyond 1.5 is not acceptable. Anything
Yes.
beyond 2, the combined area of both the orifices is acceptable. And
Yes.
as you said, the 3D vena contracta area of the individual jets, if together is satisfying severe MR, to be repaired again. If
Yes.
all together falls below 7, it is fine repair, good repair.
Yes.
Yeah, there is one question here, that how reliable is the gradient in an Alfieri stitch, because there are two orifices.
Yes. The gradient assessment is not that important in Alfieri. The collective area to be taken at least above 2, and the leaking, as Dr. Ander pointed, the vena contracta area of each jet to be less than 7. So this is the most ideal repair. The gradient is not the factor.
Okay, thank you, sir.
There is another question from Dr. Sachin Kumar from audience. What is the role of 3D versus 4D echo, intraoperative or preoperative assessment of the mitral valve?
2D over 3D. So the assessment, let's say the pathology. So that depends on the experience of the echocardiographer. So there are different studies showing a superiority of 3D regarding the correct definition of the, let's say, prolapse. And we also have done a study of that. So the charming thing of 3D is that everyone looks at the same image and everyone has the same impression. With 2D, everyone makes maybe a little bit different 3D reconstruction. But coming down to numbers, if we look at our study, what we have performed and published in the Annals of Cardiac Anesthesia, for P2 prolapse, there's no advantage of 3D at all. There may be some advantage coming to the commissures, where 3D is much more reliable than 2D, but that again depends on the experience of the echocardiographer. For the mitral regurg, as we have pointed that out, 3D vena contracta area, that is definitely superior to any of the 2D measurements. But for the valve assessment itself, I think if you have a very experienced echocardiographer, then 2D is comparable with 3D.
He asked Dr. Ender 3D versus 4D.
I'm not sure what you mean with 4D. So it's 3D with over time, or what is 4D? That is what I mean. So could you clarify what is 4D?
3D in dynamics.
For me, 4D is 3D live or whatever. Is that true?
4D is 3D only for us.
4D is 3D in dynamics. 4D is 3D in dynamics.
Yes, dynamics. That's it. So and that. So looking at all the softwares, unfortunately, let's say like Tomtec or Philips, they cannot yet depict the mitral leaflet pathologies who overrides the commissures, and they cannot really good predict the dynamic changes in my mind. But that is just my personal impression.
So now we'll take the last question. Sir, Dr. Koshi, if there's one parameter you want to rely on about PPM, which one would that be?
Upper velocity index, the flow independent, then orifice area, flow independent. I go by the flow independent parameters. There is one question I think Rajesh Sher has put up, but there are multiple jets, MR jets, how you quantify. Is that Rajesh? I think it was somewhere up in the queries. Multiple MR jets, how you quantify MR. Did Rajesh ask that question?
No, my question was different. My question was a bileaflet wall, the smaller orifice, bigger orifice.
Yeah.
How do you do this? But this question has been answered already by Dr. Andre and Mahala.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's why I did not take this question.
Yeah.
Okay, so anybody has any comments to make, or else our virtual dinner is ready.
How many people are
somebody asked a question about the differentiation between the pannus and the thrombus.
Yes.
I just wanted to make it a little bit clear on this issue. Because as a cardiologist, what we look actually, this is like which is the first. The chicken is the first or the egg is the first. So the issue is here, we look at the first, the anticoagulation profile or the TTR. If the TTR is not well maintained or the TTR is suboptimal as accepted for the valve for a longer period, at least 3 months, that goes in favor of thrombus. Then after the TTR, then we look at the echo parameters. Like the another clinical parameter is he has an episode of thromboembolism, cardiac source of embolism. That speaks in favor of a thrombus. Then do an echo. You find a thrombus in the LA, anywhere else other than the valve, like the appendage or the body or the roof or towards the septum. That favors again thrombus. Then come to the structure of the valve proper. The pannus by definition starts from the annulus, climbs over or runs over the leaflet or the occluder, where the thrombus can be anywhere else. If you find luckily some thrombus on the occluder, not towards the swing ring, it goes in favor of thrombus. Then second point is size. You check the echo, it was a particular size. It has grown within a short span of time. It is in favor of thrombus. Then a trial of anticoagulation or thrombolytic therapy. I have given in a high gradient situation a lytic therapy, and after that gradient has come down. That is in favor of thrombus. But taking aside all these points, still we have the confusion because thrombus and pannus commonly exist together. It is not one. So it is a recently operated valve. Yes, it is thrombus. If it is a longer duration, it is study-wise 40-50% pannus, 40-45% thrombus, 30-35% or 40% combination. So you land in finding a combination of pannus and thrombus. Then comes MRI there. If the valve is compatible for an MRI, you can get some clue. If it is not considered as a pannus, give a trial of anticoagulation or thrombolytic therapy.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
You
Thank
answered
you, Dr.
completely.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
So,
Sir, I
yeah,
want to
so
comment.
now-
Sir,
Yes,
hello.
last comment by
Okay,
Dr.
okay.
Jigisha.
Yeah, that's the last
Sir,
comment.
actually, this is for all juniors. Most of the time when patient come of bypass, just before bypass or just immediately after coming of bypass, valve repair or something is assessed. At that time, heart is not completely filled up. So you don't get proper images and you don't get proper idea about the valve dehiscence or like regurgitation or repair is adequate or not. So be patient. Surgeon is mainly eager. Here 3 surgeons are there with us. They are very eager to know the result of the repair or the something paravalvular. But once adequate filling condition is there, then and then only valve or anything in the heart by 2D or 3D should be assessed. We should not be in hurry because surgeon is in hurry. We are not in hurry. We should have patience and assess after complete filling of the heart. Otherwise, you will not get some other people or cardiologists will come and comment because you manage patient nicely after 10-15 minutes. Then somebody else outside come and comment on the things and juniors will depress. Okay, why we are not getting this type of the things. Even VSD closer also, we have to see everything after complete filling condition. And after 10-15 minutes, we have to reevaluate. Initially, in assessment is okay, but we have to assess after 10-15 minutes. This is for all juniors.
Thank you. Thank you for that excellent message. Very valid and apt message. Thank you, Jigisha, for that. I think Nilesh, I think we should close now.
Yeah, yeah.
Because the virtual dinner which I made is waiting for all of us.
Yes, sir.
Please
Yes, so I
join
would
the
like to
virtual
thank. So I would like to thank all the
Nilesh,
panelists, all the
1 minute.
speakers.
I think Rajesh wants to say something. Is Rajesh there? Rajesh Arya?
Yeah.
1 minute.
Sir, I'll just give you the statistics of today's meeting. We were online for 171 minutes. And can anybody guess how many delegates were there with us online?
3,500?
No, you are too less. We were 107 online attached.
How much?
4107.
Great. 10. Wow.
4107. 4,107 people were online with us.
Is it true?
That's great.
That most of the questions have been answered.
Rajesh, I did say this at the very start of this particular session, that considering the panelists and the speakers today, we will have it in a much bigger way. That is what I had said right in the first 5 minutes.
Yesterday we were 2289. Today we 4107. Tomorrow the spike is going up and up and up.
Like coronavirus.
Muralidhar sir.
It's like coronavirus.
Muralidhar sir, this is a much better number than this thing, because I had
but I am not a virus.
And it's all Dr. Murli and then the effort of the this Medinet people. And
pink light by the
Philips and G. Today's session was sponsored by Philips people. Back to Dr. Murli for the final comments and introduce tomorrow's program to the audience.
Thank you, Nilesh and Minati for excellently conducting the program. I'm indebted to all the speakers, Patil, Akoli Ghosh, George Ender, Chirojit Mukherjee, Thomas Kochi for their excellent presentations. And also my gratitude to Dr. B.K. Mahala, Priyankar Sinha, Ravindra Sethi, Jigisha Sachde for having present and conducted the panel discussion in a very, very lovely manner. And tomorrow we'll meet again at 5:45 p.m. And tomorrow we have a very interesting session of what we call as Golden Fate. And Dr. Rajesh Arya will be introducing you the Eco Library. And that will be a very important part of tomorrow's meeting. Please join us. And till we meet tomorrow. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Good night, sir.
Good night.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good
Thank
night.
you.
Thank you.